let's get you some fresh
How
water.
close to the mic do I need to be?
About 6 inches or so would be good.
Okay.
If you need to shuffle your chair, then go for it. It's not on wheels, so you might have to just give it a bit of a nudge.
No, it is on wheels.
Oh, cool.
Right.
Oh, you got the wheelchair?
I've got the wheelie one. Oh, sorry.
Why.
I've stolen the best chair.
No, it's my height. If I sit in one that's too tall, I look a bit like a freak on the camera.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You have to think about these things now,
I
don't
do. Well,
you?
after numerous episodes, you kind of start to think, oh, why do I look so big? And then you realise your chair's propped up. I've even brought a giant flask because I thought we'd be talking for a while.
Excellent.
One of the things that excited me was that you referred to yourself as a psychology nerd.
Yes.
On your website.
Yeah.
And I do the same.
Okay.
So I thought we'd talk about that because we're rolling, by the way. I always do this with guests. They're like, have you hit record yet, Alex? I'm like, yeah, we're on. Okay. I actually met you a while ago at TedX.
Yes.
And it was only when you mentioned it that I knew. So that was cool. So we've actually already met.
Yes, we have.
Heard you do
it was
talk.
very, very briefly. You did. I think it was one of my rehearsal talks. I
was it?
think it might have been, yeah.
Maybe I didn't go to the actual event then. This was a long time ago.
It was. Because
Graham Hall was there, the dog father.
Yes.
And there was another lady there who used to come to the gym that I owned at the time. I can't remember her name because I didn't train her. But yeah, maybe it was a rehearsal.
Yes, I think it
and
might
weight loss
have
bitch.
been.
Weight loss
Yes.
bitch.
Yes.
Yeah, so what did you talk about?
I talked about how surviving sexual abuse can be the making, not the breaking of you. So it was quite a hard hitting subject.
Yeah.
So I kind of preempted it with a bit of a, this is a huge taboo subject that most people really don't want to have to discuss. So let me share my story and then perhaps people can understand a little bit about what it's like as a survivor as you kind of go on that journey of unpicking what happened and who you actually really are.
Yeah, so what's the tipping point for when you decide, like, I'm going to start to talk about this publicly? Like, because obviously it's a difficult thing for you to talk about. I guess it's difficult for people to listen to sometimes as well.
I think it's harder for people to listen to than it is for me to talk about, yes.
Do you not think it's all stages of where you're at that precise time? So although it'd be difficult for me to hear you talk about it, I'd be very open to listen to it because it's struggle. And that's something I would perversely enjoy listening to because it's relatable.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it's timing. But there must be a timing thing for you where you think, right, I'm going to go on stage, all the lights on me, pressure, and I'm going to talk about some of the horrible experiences I've been through. Yeah.
Oh, there was definitely, there's a turning point, I guess, in the therapy side of it in terms of when you feel ready to. So it was, it was a massive secret that only I knew for most of my life. And then through the therapy work actually that I did with Safeline, that was what started to change it. The difference for me was having seen other therapists going to Safeline where they specialise in helping and supporting survivors of sexual abuse and their family and friends if needed. But going to somebody or going to an organisation, a charity as Safeline are, where all of the counsellors are specifically trained to understand how you were scarred through that experience, is what really made the difference for me. I'd seen other counsellors and psychologists, but they just never quite understood the legacy that you get having been through sexual abuse as a child. And Safeline did, and their counsellors did, and that was the tipping point for me. Was I still had a good few years of therapy, sort of on and off at times through Safeline. Just as it's the layers of the onion, as all counselling is described as. You've got to keep getting. But I got to a point where I owned my story. I was able to absorb what happened to me and understand it as part of who I am now and how it's changed me, rather than I think previously it had been something that I sort of dragged around. And that's the difficult thing, is you have to kind of really clean out the wound, and let it heal really properly. And that was the point when I sort of felt that nobody was really talking about it. There wasn't, for want of a better phrase, there wasn't a face of sexual abuse out there. And that was the point for me, as I just thought, well, there's lots of people out there that are suffering in silence, like I had done. What would it mean to them if they heard somebody share their story and they could then say, but that's how I feel, but she doesn't feel like that anymore, so what, maybe that's possible for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And was it part of the healing process for you to go on stage and talk? Because I find that a lot of the things that I keep secret are the things that haunt me the most. So it's only when I either write them down or get them out of my system and look at them, they start to become less controlling over me. Absolutely,
yeah. The way that one of my counsellors phrased it once, and it's always stayed with me, and it's phrasing that I've used with clients myself now as a psychologist, but she said it's the dark recesses of your mind where the shame hides, and it grows in the dark like a mould.
Yeah.
And you have to go in and you have to shine a light in every single corner of that room, and you have to look at what's there, and you have to accept that it's there, and you have to process that it's there, and you have to allow it to be a part of your story. And that's how you take the power back. That's how you take ownership over what happened to you, and you then move forwards in a much more complete way, as opposed to hiding from bits of yourself.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. The only challenge that I have with this is, how do we let it not become our identity? So if we use it as our driving story, which makes total sense, we can inspire people with it, we can show people how we've overcome. But if we keep referring, this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me, how do we allow it to be part of our story but break away from, but that's me, that's who I am, that's what drives me? Do you think about that? I do, and there have been times when I think I have probably, caught myself and thought, do I want to keep wearing this label? Do I want to keep telling people, by the way, this is what happened to me? And it's and people are just like, that's really uncomfortable. But I guess for me, it's the balance of what are the other things that go on in my life, where do I get nourished in other parts of my life, so that this is something that I'm passionate about in terms of sharing the message and letting people know that it's possible to have a different future and not always live in the past. But I also balance that with, well, what's my home life like? What's my family life like? What's my friendship circle like? How do I be just the normal Lydia that all those people have known, as well as the person that says, okay, today I'm putting on my boots and I'm going out to talk about this again. I think over time, the line is blurring between those two things, because everybody in my world knows what happened to me. So it is something that I can just say, oh, I'm off to do a podcast today with Alex, connected with Safeline, may well be talking about what my childhood was like and those sorts of things. And people just like, oh, okay, that sounds cool. And it's just, that's all it is. As opposed to it being, right, how else can I push this and how else can I drive it forward? Because you must obviously dealing with, I'll call them clients, is that the right word? Clients?
Yes. Yeah.
You must come across a lot of people that get stuck in their own story. Or they're, victim perhaps, or just can't get past something in particular, and they identify with something that's happened, and that's who they are. Where on earth do you start to break this down so that people can move past it and, I guess, learn from it and make their life better going forward, regardless or despite of what horrible things might have happened to them? Yeah,
it's a real challenge, and I think the biggest part that I take from my own experience is, I was really motivated to not have this rule the rest of my life. I was really quite determined to say, this is going to be a horrible journey, but it's taken too much from me already. I want something different. So that drove a lot of my counselling, as the client myself. I think with my clients now, and I see clients for a range of different things. I don't do counselling via Safeline, but I think whenever anyone comes to me stuck over anything, we often look first of all at what's the story you're telling yourself. And why is that so important to you? Because so often I think behind the story we tell ourselves about who we are or what happened to us, there is often, well, if I say it to that way, then I control it, or it protects me in some way, it stops me moving forward. And so we, quite often it's about having to dig into that. Okay, what is the fear behind all of this?
Yeah.
That you're not going to be safe in some way. And what we tend to find is that with a lot of people, it's they don't quite trust themselves. I don't quite trust myself that if it goes wrong again, I'll spot it earlier than I did last time. If that's a new relationship or a new job or any new experience, it's always ties back to my brain's locked in a pattern over something else that happened before. And it might be related, it might be completely unrelated. But if we can spot what that pattern is, then we have the conscious choice rather than the subconscious pattern happening. We have the conscious choice to say, right, this is getting uncomfortable, but I'm actually still okay. I can still rely on myself to say, I am safe in this moment.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is separating ourselves from that story, because when you believe it to be true, like to move away from that and to even think that it might not be true is such a difficult thing, because in our own world and our own reality that we've created, that is etched in stone. That story. And I guess some people go through their life never really even questioning whether that story is real, let alone doing the work that has to remove you from that story that you've created, which I understand how difficult that is. It's such a hard thing to do. It must be a hard thing for a therapist as well to work with someone to remove them or start to take them away, or like say make more conscious effort to question things and look at things from a different perspective and realise that perhaps we've created some of the world that we live in. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's the way the brain works. That's the way the brain is wired. Right from day dot. Your brain is wired to say, okay, how am I experiencing the world, the environment, the situations, the people that I'm in, but also what am I understanding about who I am and who I need to be in order to survive. That's the only part of a baby's brain that's going on is, what do I need to do in order to survive? Do I need to cry more because that gets me more attention, more food, more milk, all of those things? And that continues to develop in terms of how our needs are met. And the challenge is understanding and looking at, okay, what were those experiences? Kind of how did my first 1,000 days, when my blueprint for what I think, who I think I am and how I think I experience the world and therefore who I need to be to survive in this, that gets laid down in the first 1,000 days. So they're really, really critical. And if we look back, at people's first 1,000 days, if they know about it, we can often find out, okay, there was, in some ways, we didn't feel safe or needs weren't met in the right way, or, parents went off and did other things and it just made us go, oh, what's going on here? So it's always looking at story, because brains are wired for story. That's why media is so massive. That's why people listen to podcasts and watch TV shows, because we're wired for story. It's the only way we were able to communicate before paper and other things like that, was the elders told a story of what life's like and where you go and where you don't go. So our brains are just wired for it all the time. So of course we tell ourselves stories about who we think other people are, or how we think they live our lives, or what we think they think about us, or who we think we are in the world. It's taking charge of that narrative and saying, actually, if some of that story isn't working for me anymore, if it's holding me back, I have the autonomy to say I could change that story. It doesn't mean I'm rewriting who I am, but ultimately the goal should be I'm trying to get back to my more authentic self, the person that I came into this world to be, but then the world around me and the people around me shaped me in a way that made me go, it's not really safe if I'm like that all the time. So I'll dial down that part of myself in order to survive, and then I keep dialing it down. And then as I get older, I feel a bit like, I just don't feel very comfortable. I don't like this, I don't like that, either about myself or situations, a lot of social anxiety these days. And it's just understanding, okay, well, are there parts of yourself that you're yet to embrace, that you had to change for reasons?
surely the older you become, if that story's been with you, right? So if you're 15 and you suddenly start to become aware that, well, maybe this story is something I can change. Maybe you've got a good shot. If you're like 45, right, and you've been telling yourself the same bullshit for 45 years, like, without being cynical, like, what are the hopes of you moving away from that? Because we all know people, or we've all, maybe this is ourselves, where we're just so stuck that we don't feel like there's anything we can do to get out of that. And some people are probably right. So the footprint years that they've experienced, they might have set them on a path that they just have never challenged. Obviously, it does become harder the older you get, right? Like, is there a point, like, where you go past the point of return?
From a scientific point of view, no, there isn't, because your brain has neuroplasticity throughout your entire life, so you can learn throughout your whole life.
So that can be shaped and changed.
That can absolutely be shaped.
Stage.
Yeah, 100% it can. It comes back to fear is the biggest thing, which is people say, if I start to change this now, how much of my life is going to unravel as I really figure out who I am? And actually it feels, again, safer to stay locked in this pattern, even if it's not healthy, than it does to change it. Because what if that means I look at my partner of several years or family members and go, actually, you've never been nice to me. I don't want to have contact with you anymore. Or it brings up a lot of grief about the way people that aren't with us anymore have treated us.
Yeah.
Or it looks at friendships and work and all sorts of the different aspects of our life that are affected by our story. And people go, that's too scary to change all of that, because what if I walk away from everything I know? And it's like, there might be happiness the other side of that. There isn't if you stay in what you're doing.
No,
but it feels safe because
and predictable.
Change, predictable.
Yeah, so misery is quite predictable. But it's also quite reassuring.
It's easy to control misery.
For sure, yeah. And I was speaking to Gary before you were and he was on the podcast. He's got MS. He's a fantastic, inspirational guy, and we were saying that we find like there's middle ground where people won't change if things are okay. So even if they're unhappy, but they're okay, they won't change. I know this from my own experience. Things either have to become so bad, so painful that you can no longer tolerate that pain. But if things are just bad, I'm not moving. I'm not moving for anyone, because it's safe, it's predictable, and I'm okay. I'm not happy, but I'm okay. And it's
I've got control. I have the illusion of control.
Yeah. Isn't everything kind of an illusion, though? So these stories that we're talking about, isn't it our job just to create one that gets us through life, enjoying it as much as possible, even if it is an illusion?
Yeah, it is. I think where I always start with people is let's have a look at your values. What are the things, if you had to choose sort of between 3 and 6 words that would say, these are the ways that I want to conduct myself in the world. These are the ways that I want, that would challenge me. You know, that in different situations, it's going to be very hard to show this characteristic or this way of being. Sometimes it'd be very hard to show that to myself. I think if you start with understanding what your values are as a person, it has an enormous influence at rippling through your life, where you end up making life changes that are just much more harmonious with who you are. And it feels a lot less scary than saying, that person's really toxic to you, you probably need to take them out of your life. It's, well, let's have a look at your values and then say, okay, so where do you see those values shared with other people in your life? Yeah.
We've done a lot of work on values inside the group that I'm in, that I coach. It's really important to us. You'll find a lot of people's values are similar, because the way I see values is, if, you know, because a lot of guys will say, well, I don't know what they are, you know, I'm not sure, which we do when we do some, you know, when we do dig in and we bury, like, you know what's important. The way I view it is, again, maybe cynical, maybe not, but like, if you were to rip something away from me, what would be important then? So I know that one of my biggest values is my mental and physical health, because without that, like, nothing else really matters, because it's been taken from me. So I know that that's important. So now I value it, because I've experienced life without it. I value family, because again, if I woke up tomorrow and my mum and dad weren't here, I'd be devastated. So I think our values are sometimes more clear than what we like to make out. Like, we can do drills and stuff on them all day, and I don't know how you help someone discover their values, but they're quite apparent when you slow down, turn the volume down on things, and and have a look at what is important. I think we just get lost, and like the world's quite noisy. So like I think Instagram's important. It's fucking not. It's really not. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's like, is that one way to discover your values, is to like turn the noise down on things and just pay attention?
So the way that I look at values is perhaps slightly different, perhaps one layer down from that. So for example, my 4 values are love, trust, honesty, and freedom. Okay. So they're not about, don't get me wrong, my mental and physical health is really, really important to me. You know, I've have had battles certainly with my mental health, and I know that being physically healthy massively impacts my mental health in a positive way for me. It doesn't for everyone, but I know that it does for me.
For everyone, surely.
Some people don't quite get the same. Their bodies don't always respond in the same way to exercise that other people's do. Yeah. So that was more. But I appreciate that being physically active in some way, as opposed to sporty or fit or those sorts of things. Yeah. But the reason that love, trust, honesty, and freedom are my 4 values is they are the core ways that I want to conduct myself in the world. So they are attributes that I want to show other people. I haven't always found it easy to show those. I don't always find it easy to accept them back. And there are some situations where I find it very difficult to have to stay in those 4 values, particularly if somebody isn't being very nice. So that's where I get to with values is, you know, trust is a massive one. It has been in the past very hard for me to trust people, given my experiences in childhood. But as an adult, to calm my inner child when I meet new people and I share my story with them, it's about having to say, actually, she needs to trust me in this moment, that I've got this. I'm an adult. I know what I'm doing. I know my story, and I know that it's safe to share it. And she might get a bit nervous about that, not want to do it. But it's about me trusting myself that I can talk about what I'm comfortable with, and I can equally move conversations around if I need to deflect from something if I didn't want to talk about it. There isn't actually anything I don't want to talk about, but if I needed to, there have been times when it's felt like that for sure. But it's also about me being able to trust other people and allow them into my life, and to realise that I can recognise when someone's safe, and I can also now recognise when somebody appears very exciting to begin with, but actually over time is perhaps going to be, for want of a better word, slightly abusive in terms of perhaps not respecting my emotions, or perhaps being a bit mentally challenging in those sorts of ways, in a negative way. So trust is a massive one, because it's about me having to trust other people. It's about me having to trust myself and the choices that I make, and that I don't push myself too hard to keep talking about things if I think, do you know what, I need to step back for a little bit. So it's those sorts of things. And you know, love's another one. It can be very difficult in some situations to keep showing certain people love.
Of course, yeah.
And it can equally sometimes be very difficult to accept that other people really do love you. And so that's why I have things like that as my values, because I want them to be ways that I conduct myself that influence how I am in all sorts of different situations at any point in time in any day, that make me go, I feel like I want to run away. What's going on? Why is that? Is that because there really is a red flag here? Or is it just a historical thing of my inner child getting very nervous right now, and I need to calm her down and say, it's all right, I've got this. Adult me's in charge right now.
Yeah, I mean, that's super interesting. Lydia, can I change my chair? Because
Yes.
I love the wheelie chair.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I've spilled tea everywhere, so that was a good start. Thank you. That's better. Yeah, this is fascinating to me, because the trust thing is something that's tortured me. So I used to think trust was about, can I trust that person?
Yes.
Can I trust that person? And I never really thought about it as a inner skill or a reflection, which is kind of like what you've just said there. It's like, yeah, can I trust me? Because that's the that's the first stage, and that's a lifetime goal, isn't it, to keep working on your own self-trust. And that coincides with love as well, because love's quite painful if you don't trust the person that you're with. But there's also a part of me that knows that you can never trust anyone 100%.
No. So
what do? So you go, right, well, the only thing I need to work on is, do I trust myself, and do I trust myself to get through whatever happens?
Yeah.
If it goes well, amazing, I'm there. If it doesn't, do I trust that I can pick myself up and go again? I think that's the challenge when it comes to trust.
Yeah.
Internally, like when you're on your own, do you trust yourself? That kind of thing. This is all hard, ugly stuff.
It is. It's really brutal stuff when you get into it.
And it feels like you shouldn't have to go through it. There's always resistance. It's like, why do you have to do this? And there is no answer. You just have to if you want to survive and get through. I believe anyway. But yeah, it's almost frustrating that as humans we're so complicated.
It is. And we have to expect that other people are going to hurt us. The difference is, in a relationship, are they doing it intentionally, or was it an accident and they did something, and you have the communication skills between the two of you to say, actually, I found that really hard that you did that, and this is why, and I can explain to you why that is a trigger for me.
Sure.
So I can own that myself. But are you with someone who's able to go, okay, I get that, it wasn't intentional, but I do apologise, because I can see that it has triggered you or hurt you in some way, and I will try my best not to do something the same or similar again. But there's that huge difference between, you have to expect that there's going to be some hurt. It comes back again to, can I trust myself though to see whether it's intentional and malicious, or whether this is just that person on their journey as well, and they fucked up there, and I need to go, that wasn't your finest moment for these reasons. For me, that's a real struggle. And can they go, actually, I can calibrate to that, I can see where you're coming from, I can't promise I won't do something like it again, but I'm really going to try not to.
Yeah, and that's so difficult to do. Like when you mentioned the word red flags, I'm like, does that mean that's a sackable offence, or does this just something we need to address now before it gets worse? Because there's always red flags in relationships, right? Or in people, in humans, because we're so flawed, right?
Yeah. I don't know that there's always red flags. I think that there is people leaving.
Sorry. It's a busy one today.
I know.
It's a busy one. So yeah, what is a red flag? Like, what determines whether it's just a flaw or a red flag?
I think a red flag is generally whether it's intentional.
Okay. So you are purposely trying to hurt me.
Yeah. And that might be because of your own stuff.
Is that always known by the
Not
individual?
always. No, not always.
So it might be so apparent to them that I'm intentionally hurting someone or whatever, but for me it's just it's a defense mechanism, or it's a shadow, or it's an ugly part of me that I don't feel like I've got much control over. It's always hard knowing, well, what's toxic versus this person really just has some issues here. Because then we're kind of saying, well, if you've got issues, or I'm sorry, like, that's it. It's like, it's hard to know what the line is. I guess maybe this comes back to knowing yourself really well. Yeah,
I think it does, and I think, there's one thing I think that is just massively underrated. I think which is kindness.
Yeah.
Does a person function from a place primarily of kindness? And that doesn't mean that sometimes they don't get in a mood, or they don't disagree with you over something, but it's still about how they conduct themselves in that moment, which is, we don't need to get personal, we don't need to get vicious, we don't need to be unkind. We can disagree and say, look, I just don't like the way you're doing that, or handling that, or the fact that you did this other thing. It's just not okay with me, and I'm happy to explore why that's not okay with me, but I need you to explore why you did it. But generally, if people are coming from a place of kindness, they will be like, okay, well, I don't want you to feel like that again. So I want to look at both sides of why that happened, so that we can keep evolving together and stay on this same path. But I think when people get to a point where it feels like, actually, you're just being unkind, and that might be your defense mechanism.
Sure.
But once you've calmed down, if you can't take responsibility for the fact that that was your defense mechanism, then we start to look at red flags and go, we've got an issue here.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Can you teach kindness?
I think to a lot of people you can. I think there are some psychological disorders where you can't, because kindness involves empathy.
Yeah.
And there are some people that can't empathise.
Why? Is this a genetic thing, or is this like you've been so fucked up when you're young? Like, yeah, you just don't have that in you. It's been beaten out of you, that empathetic side that most humans have. Yeah, your upbringing was so strenuous and so painful that you just can't relate now. Like, what usually is the reason why people don't have empathy?
It's a bit of a mix of the two, to be honest. So there are certain personality disorders that are genetic. So if we move from the spectrum, if we look at all human beings on a spectrum of empathy, and we've got people with really, really high empathy, that actually they find life really, really difficult because they're so highly sensitive to how everybody feels, and they are, the uber people pleasers, and they never come first themselves, and that's the one extreme. The vast majority of us fit within the middle of the bell curve, as it always is, where we've got, a reasonable amount of empathy, perhaps more in some situations and a bit less when we're tired and other things like that. And that spectrum then moves all the way down to the point where you get zero empathy. And there are two sides of zero empathy. So it moves from losing empathy into more and more processing, which is I just see the world as I process information and I don't engage with feelings. That moves into your Asperger's side of things, which then moves further down into the more extreme lack of empathy, which is into the autism spectrum, which again is an enormous spectrum. And then at the very extreme end of it, we have no empathy at all. And there are two sides to that coin. One is extreme autism. The other side is psychopaths. And they have no empathy. And that is a born situation.
Yeah.
That is the way that genetically their brain was composed. It gets triggered and accelerated by childhood circumstances. So what we know is that a huge number of the enormously successful sort of CEOs of the world and people like that would score really highly as psychopaths.
Just say it, they're psychopaths, yeah.
They do score really highly on the psychopath test because they don't really care about the people that work for them.
But they're celebrated at the same time.
They are, because they're hugely successful, and we celebrate wealth and success and things like that as a species. So we can look at that and we can say, yes, we can see how their childhoods have also emphasised and encouraged this lack of empathy within them. But most people are born with no empathy because babies can't be empathetic. They have to put themselves first. We tend to teach empathy as they become little toddlers and children and that, because we talk about, please, can you do that? Don't do that. That makes, if you go and take that toy off Tommy in the playground, now Tommy's crying. We don't want Tommy, so we teach empathy. We don't necessarily realise that's what we're teaching, but we do tend to teach it in terms of we need to think about how other people are, because that's how we encourage play.
Sure, yeah.
So it does get taught in a huge way, but some people are more genetically engaged in it and pick up on it straight away, and they're just like, oh my god, look at the little doggy and the little duck and all of this, and they're really in it. And there are other kids that are like, meh, not so much, but they kind of have to figure out actually to get what I want, which is friends and community around me, which is what I need to keep safe. I've got to kind of learn these skills of sharing and thinking about how other people feel and those sorts of things. So the empathy side of things is as I said, it's just this enormous sort of spectrum.
Yeah, like most things, I guess, like that totally makes sense. That everything is a spectrum, right? It's like where we sit on it. But the reason why I set up the Better Man was because like, I started to get to a point in my life where I was achieving things, but it didn't really count for much. And, I could still be just as nasty even if I'd achieved good things on paper, financially, got the car, got the house, all the things that most people start off on that ladder, don't they? And they set themselves these goals. And then, I suddenly kind of realised, I was like, well, actually, like, I think I'd like myself better if I was kinder, or if I could empathise more. Because, again, I don't know whether, and you'll be able to shed some light on this, I'm sure, like, whether it's a masculine, feminine difference, do men or masculine, characters find it harder to show empathy? Do they find it harder to sympathise and, you know, attach or understand their emotions and how they feel? Because I hear a lot about psychopaths don't really know how they feel either. They're not in tune with it. They don't really understand it. They can't explain it.
They just don't really they don't really experience feelings. They just don't recognise that was good and that was bad, or, you know, that's why, you know, if we go to psychopaths as the extreme in terms of psychopaths that kill, they quite often kill because they want to see the expression on the person's face. So they're like, oh right, so that's what pain looks like. That's what, you know, that's what you often find with those sorts of situations. Is that's why they're doing it, is they can't read emotion. If you showed them a picture book of lots of different faces and some were smiling and some were angry and stuff like that, they'd be like, I don't know what that person's feeling. They really don't. And teenagers go through a phase of that.
Of course. This is why self-development's hard, because you're literally cutting yourself open and having a look at all of this stuff. So it's easier probably not to take a look in there, because you can feel like there's so much wrong with you that needs fixing. That you're like, I don't know where, and you start to question whether you're a good person. So I know just doing things like real small things, like spending time with my mum and dad, and just doing little things that give me evidence that there's a nice person inside there. You know, you can be a nice guy, because we train ourselves probably to think poorly of ourselves. We remember all the shit things, we remember all the bad things that we've done. You know, we zone in on the ugly stuff versus, like, I believe every human's got potential to do something nice. Maybe, I don't know whether you agree with that, but yeah, I think it's there inside of us. It's, can we train it to come out? Can we control it? Because also most men, like, it's good for them to be slightly dangerous and physically capable and fit and be aggressive when they need to be, if they need to be aggressive. So it's like, how do I control these elements of me and still be centered and still be a good, decent human being? It's a real head puzzle. It's a good game. It's a life project. So when we talk about goals now, it's like, well, there you go. There's a life goal. Just try and become the best, not nicest, but just the best man you can become. That's how we kind of attack it now. Yeah. And understanding what that looks like.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said before about, you know, the differences between men and women in terms of empathy and that side of things, there is a difference, but we can't say that it's a biological difference, like 100% or anything like that. We find that more women are on the feelings empathy end of the spectrum, and more men tend to fall in terms of the normative curve, the bell curve that we have of normal distribution. We find that more males are more in the processing side of empathy, so they're moving slightly away from the middle and towards the Asperger's and autism. Not that all men have it or anything like that. And you get men and women that swap over in either one.
Of course, yeah.
What we think is probably one of the biggest contributions is actually the way that we raise boys and girls differently. Yeah. Which is, girls are taught and they see a model at home more often than not of mum being a primary caregiver, mum thinking of everybody else, mum, you know, doing all of these different things. And boys don't see the same from the male role model in the home. I'm not saying this is across the board, because obviously families are very differently blended these days, and there are different family setups. But it's, a lot of it is a cultural thing in terms of how we are raising boys and girls differently. You know, if you have a boy who's quite assertive and those sorts of things, everyone goes, God, he's going to be a good leader, isn't he? You know, he could captain the football team and he'll go on to do other things. If you get a girl that's more assertive, she tends to be called bossy. It hasn't historically been encouraged in the same kind of way. So we have to look at, as a culture, how do we raise boys and girls, for one thing, to say, actually, how does that influence not only, you know, how they connect with empathy, but also the role models of, you know, well, my dad and his friends have these sorts of jobs, and my mum and her friends have these sorts of jobs or these sorts of lives, and all of that sort of stuff. So all of that stuff influences it, and all of that stuff becomes the story. It feeds into well, who do I think I need to be? What do I see around me? And what do I start to identify with?
Okay. I know, I love it. I know I love talking with you.
Thanks.
Where's the danger of going against nature, though, in what you've just said? So if 1 and 2 year old boys are going to run around and start destroying things, which they naturally do, right? They they just play differently. They're more aggressive. Like, at what point do we accept that is biology? And like you say, not in all cases, but in most. Like, where do we like lay down the structures and say, well, that's okay, because you're a boy, you're masculine, you have these certain traits in you that might not be present in girls, and we need to learn how to channel it. Versus, like, how much of it is culture versus biology?
So, from a cultural point of view, I guess from a biology point of view, the predominant thing that we're looking at is the hormonal differences. Yeah. So the fact that boys have obviously a much higher level of testosterone than girls do, and we know that testosterone it peaks in boys between sort of 5 and 7, because their level of testosterone versus their body mass is quite disproportionate at that age. So that's why we get quite a lot of, I'm just really annoyed now, Mom, and we don't see the same thing in girls at that sort of age, because they don't have testosterone in anywhere close to the same levels at all. So we know that the influence that testosterone has. What we would then want to look at is, how do we actually parent in those moments? How do we parent a boy who is full of rage and anger and energy, and it's all balled up? How do we explain to him and say, that's okay, you can feel like that, but it's the difference between how you behave during that. So teaching children that they get a choice about how they behave, and also helping them identify how they feel in the moment. So if you see a young boy and he's getting really, it's like, I can see that you're getting angry. I wonder what the anger's about. Well, they haven't done this. I understand that's really frustrating, isn't it? That is. So what's a safe way that we can let that energy out? Because we can't go over and hit him or grab it or shout and do all those other things. Because what we're trying to teach again is the kindness. So it's taking responsibility for our own emotions. And if we teach that as parents...
Mother or father?
Mother or father. Okay. In fact, to be honest, whatever adults are in the family home, they all need to be on the same page with this.
How about this? If the dad says, okay, son, look, this anger that you've got, like, we're not showing it in a healthy way. Let's get out. Let's do some training together. Let's get physical. Like, wouldn't that be a smart approach from a dad to do? And it'd be okay that the mum is a little bit more loving in a different way, whereas the dad's a bit more like, come on, let's have a bit of rough and tumble. Let's teach you how to be a boy, but let's channel it well, so that you're using this energy that's in you in a purposeful way, in a healthy way that's making you fitter, stronger, healthier. Isn't that okay for the dad to take that role and the mum to be the one that's a little bit more protective and nurturing?
It's perfectly okay for the dad to do that, but to be honest, you want both parents to be nurturing and loving in that way, because that's how we change the generation of boys growing up to understand that all of their emotions are acceptable, because that's what we're really talking about, is teaching kids that you have an enormous range of emotions, and they're all okay. How you express them is the bit that we look at from a safety and a kindness point of view. But your whole range of emotions is okay, whereas the generations that are adults now, they weren't taught that all their emotions were okay. In fact, a lot of them were just like, are you going out now? Right, off you go and play down the street, and those sorts of things.
But if mothers and fathers don't bring different qualities to the raising of a child, why would you need both parents? So, like, the way that a father might show love might be in that, like, I'm going to teach you how to control the physical. This is where I think, like, that's what's missing. So, like, and this is the problem. I think there's so many immature men out there that they don't know how to behave themselves, so they can't pass that on to their children, which makes sense. It's generational, isn't it? So when I look at my dad's a great man, but there's things he wasn't taught as a young guy or a dad. So he can't teach me something he doesn't know. Yeah. Does that make sense? So it's just like it's passed down. But I'm wondering whether we'll move, because the statistics aren't getting any better, like in terms of like male suicide, even female suicide now. So I feel like we're progressing in terms of going where people want us to go in society and culture. We're more open, we talk more, things are evening out between men and women a little bit, but the statistics for some reason aren't going where we thought they would go. Things are getting worse.
I mean, what we're talking about here is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And the adult generations that are, that are sort of, 30 and above right now, on the whole, don't have great emotional intelligence because they were never taught it. It was never discussed with them. So, and then the people sort of below that, and I think particularly, the generation that are perhaps teenagers right now, they have a greater level of emotional intelligence, but they have the hindrance and the test and the challenge that is modern technology, which allows them to look up every single thing they think they've got. It allows them to navel gaze for hours because they're just sat in their bedrooms on their technology because they're not out and about meeting their mates because they don't have to leave the house anymore to catch up with their mates. And so we have to look then at the role that technology is playing in terms of people being able to disengage, even as adults, where perhaps they don't have the emotional intelligence to talk about how they're really feeling, and to understand that that's okay. Again, it comes back to you're allowed to have all of these different feelings. It's how much you buy into them. It's how much you go, yep, that's 100%. That's it. That's the only way I'm ever going to feel forever. No one's ever had one feeling for their whole life. No one's been happy their whole life, and no one's been sad or suicidal their whole life. Feelings are momentary. They pass through us. They are visitors. And it's about starting to understand that it's not denying that you have a feeling, but it's also not completely buying into it and allowing it to influence absolutely everything. It's understanding that this is really, really uncomfortable right now, and I do not like feeling this way. But I also have to understand that it will pass. It might not pass immediately, but it will pass.
And what you're saying, it's the kind of information that could honestly change somebody's entire experience of life. So like what you're saying is the kind of stuff I would have loved to have heard when I was at school. Just knowing that is like a relief of like, oh, I don't have to be owned by my emotions. It's I think it's a very male dominant thing. Like if we're angry, you'll fucking know.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing we can do. Like we want to show you that we're angry, and we will behave like children, whether it's at 15 or at 25 or at 45. And just having that education at school would have been so helpful.
Yeah.
Look, lads, like, when you get angry sometimes there is a choice, you can detach. We didn't ever speak about this, and our dads didn't know this stuff.
No.
They couldn't teach us. So we're like, the guys that I'm with now, they're around my age, we're trying to learn how to do this now. And it's hard because we're so well trained in being emotional. We always think it's women that are more emotional than men. I'm not sure. No,
I don't think it is. I think women are generally expected to have a broader spectrum of emotions, and that's more acceptable. So therefore, and because women on the whole tend to have relationships that allow them to talk stuff through.
I think women are more sensible and in tune with how they feel. Like they seem to have like this superpower that we probably wish we had, really. That they can rationalise things, but they can just make smarter decisions. Like not always, because again we all get caught up by emotions. But especially when it's anger and jealousy, it does seem to hit men a little bit harder, and they don't know what to do with it, so they fight. And they do silly things and they drink. Yeah,
because a lot of people don't like having an uncomfortable feeling.
No.
So it's how do I move out of this? This is horrible. I don't want to have this anymore. As opposed to sitting down and going, this is not pleasant. But the feeling, no one ever died of having a feeling. They died because of what they did, because they allowed that feeling to be everything, and they bought into that feeling totally. But nobody ever died from feeling jealous. Nobody ever died from feeling sad or from grief. It doesn't, that isn't the thing that kills you. It's what you do as a consequence of having that feeling to try and stop it, as opposed to just going, this is uncomfortable, but I'm going to have to sit with this for a while and let it pass.
This note from your website, which I thought was fantastic, and it's something I knew, but when you rehear something that you needed to hear, and I was like, you spoke about how thoughts come first, then they turn into feelings, then they turn into emotions, then actions, and then all of a sudden we've got these set of behaviours. And I kind of sat and contemplated on that, and I thought, we can think our way without anything happening into anger or frustration. So you're right, like that one feeling of jealousy isn't going to kill you, but like sometimes like you can play it over and over, and all of a sudden it's just this little seed, and then it's this big monster that's took over your whole body, and then you're acting like a man possessed. That's the only way I can describe it. Like, you are jealous, it becomes you. That term becomes you.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
who you are then.
Yeah,
it's not, obviously, we know this, but in the moment, there's no seeing out of it in the moment. It's like it's too late, you've got to catch it early. And I thought that was a fantastic way of thinking about it, because we sit there and we think some fucking horrible stuff sometimes.
Yeah.
And instead of it's quite appetizing though, it's quite juicy, it feels good to think about anger and fighting, because it gets something going in on your body. It does. And then you can let that play out. Before you know it, you're sitting there thinking all sorts of unhelpful, unnecessary thoughts that aren't making your life any better, but you're still having the physiological response.
But it's also about that being a learned pattern for a person.
Sure.
So that feeling of anger could be really, really comfortable to somebody because it's familiar. And that familiarity, as I said earlier on, the brain is a pattern recognizer. It is just looking for what has happened before and how do I replicate that again? Because whilst your brain is incredibly complex, it is also a little bit lazy. It doesn't want to have to start every day anew and look outside and go, there's something dark and, there's something green that's low down over there. I wonder what that is. It wants to look out and go, yep, that's grass. I know what that is. So I'm looking for patterns all of the time. If some of my early patterns are that anger is a very familiar feeling to me, even if it's not healthy, it's something that my brain will keep trying to get me to go back to, because there is a comfort in familiarity. It would be harder for me to say, I am starting to feel really angry. What if I just sit with that for a moment? And again, it comes back to sitting with that really uncomfortable feeling of, I can feel this physically. And it's like, yeah, but I can also calm my body back down again, because this just came out of a thought. It didn't necessarily come out of reality. And if it did come out of reality, okay, that tells me a lot about what you, the other person, is doing that is making me feel like this and how I process information.
So what else, Lydia? I think anger can, especially when you're young, can get you what you want.
Yeah.
So if I have a tantrum and I get what I want, I'm like, cool. I'll use that again,
Yeah.
It works. And it works in adult relationships too.
It does.
If I go moody and I'm like, I start to get attention, this works. So it's kind of being reinforced, like not through anyone's fault but my own, but I'm kind of getting what I want from these unhelpful emotions sometimes. So yeah, like you say, your brain kind of recognises that and go, okay, I'll do that next time as well.
Yeah, and that's that's the story, isn't it? That's what we buy into. The self-development work is the recognising our own patterns and saying, actually, if I continue with that pattern, is that productive for me, or is it actually, whilst it was once upon a time productive for me, it is now unproductive, and I need to look to change that because it is limiting where I want my life to go, because I keep having this anger response or this detachment response, this avoidance response, and that brings us then into people's attachment styles in terms of how they relate to people in relationships. Yeah,
makes total sense. So it sounds like we're both on the same page that we probably think we need better parenting out there as well. And again, I know that might upset or offend people. And again, I don't see that as an attack. I just see it as a skill. Like, we should all want to become better parents and better people. And like the way I see it, I don't have children, but I like to think that through all the work I'm doing on myself, I'll be able to recognise some of the things we're talking about now in myself first, and then be able to teach my son or daughter how to handle those kind of situations better.
Yeah, and I agree with you. That's exactly my journey. I didn't become a parent until I was in my late 30s, because I knew I had to do the work on myself first, because I wasn't going to let the stuff of my history influence what I did going forwards. So I had to work on myself to be able to say, right, now I can be present for another human being.
Do you ever feel ready, though, to be a parent?
Yeah, I did.
Did you?
I did,
I feel like I'd be waiting until like it was my end. Yeah, I don't think I think a child would accelerate my growth and responsibility.
It'll challenge you in ways, because what you have to remember, though, is that children unwittingly, subconsciously, they learn all of their parents' triggers.
Sure.
So they know there is no one on this earth who will trigger you more than your own child.
Yeah.
So if you haven't done the work on recognising what your triggers are and how to safely and healthily regulate yourself all the time that you are with your kid, regardless of what they throw at you, that's when you get the arguments between parents and kids.
Yeah, and it's hard
the conflict,
because I guess your kids can teach you a lot about yourself, but you don't necessarily want to use their upbringing as your chance to learn what triggers you all the time. So it's difficult. Like, I'm not a parent, like I've said, but I can imagine it's a tough old ride, and you've got to do this all whilst being sleep deprived. So you've got to be trying to be at your best self, your most patient, empathetic, responsible self, whilst 2 hours sleep. And I've got to go to work.
But also, I mean, it's not just the sleep deprived years. It's when they're teenagers. I mean, that's a whole other ball game. I've got 2 secondary school girls at home.
Okay.
And that's a whole other ball game in terms of they're trying to figure themselves out, and they're trying to figure out their social groups, because the teenage brain goes through the second biggest development ever from like birth years. The first 1,000 days is the biggest brain development. The next big one is the teenage years. They lose the ability to have empathy. They lose the ability to read facial expressions, to hear tone of voice. Everything becomes about them again. It's a very narcissistic age, because they're trying to separate. Biologically, they're trying to separate from family, because the biology of a teenager is that obviously they're becoming more sexually aware and those sorts of things. So they have to differentiate between family and people outside of family so that they can go on to find future partners and all of those sorts of things. So there's a huge biological draw for teenagers to have to spend time with their friends, because that's their tribe, and to disassociate with their family and be like, oh, you guys are so lame, I hate you, God, Dad, why did you chew so loud, that's horrible. All of those sorts of things happen, but actually they are really, really important biological markers to cause that divide, so that they go off into the world and their sexual awareness is outside of the family as opposed to in.
Yeah, you're so right. I gave my mum and dad way more shit when I was a teenager, way more stuff to worry about, like crazy nights out, not coming back, and major, wouldn't speak for years, and girls would come on the scene, and all sorts of reasons for them to stress. My mum used to wait up until I was home from town till 4 a.m, 5 a.m, and I'd pop into my bed, collapse, and she'd pop up to check out. As soon as she knew I was home, she'd be able to sleep. And that's the kind of worry and stress that I guess parents go through. So with your clientele then, like what's the kind of do you predominantly work with women or with men, or is it an even balance? Like who are you working with, and what common issues or problems are you finding that are apparent throughout the course?
It's always been a 50-50 split, which has always been interesting because it isn't how I positioned it initially.
How was it initially?
So initially it was positioned as for women.
Okay.
And yet I've always had a 50-50 split. So after a couple of years, I changed the website to make it a lot more neutral, because I was like, that's nuts. Yeah. That doesn't need to be like that now.
Yeah. It's kind of cool though as well, because I guess you get to see it from both sides, as they say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. I wouldn't say that there's a massive difference between the work I do with any male clients or any female clients. I think people generally come to me when they're feeling stuck, when they are not feeling good about themselves. I think one of the biggest, by far and away the biggest commonalities I have is the underlying narrative of, on some level, I'm not good enough.
Yeah,
and that's not gender specific at all.
No, I understand. Yeah.
So that's probably predominantly a lot of my work. I mean, I work with couples as well. I work with them in terms of their relationship, and then sometimes we do one-to-one work if one partner needs to sort of go, actually, I probably need to take this out of the relationship and just work on this, and then come back into the joint couples sort of therapy sessions. And then interestingly, and I guess sort of not surprisingly, is over lockdown, there's become more and more children.
Right, yeah.
So generally around secondary school age.
Yeah, I think they were the worrying stats that I was doing a bit of research on, especially in young girls, like a lot of self-harm and suicide, like say, scarily catching up. And a lot of loneliness as well they were talking about, that women are experiencing. Catching up, because men predominantly have been the ones, statistically, that have said that they're most lonely, and obviously suicide rates are higher, but the gap is closing, but not because the men's numbers are improving. It's because the women's numbers are going up, which is scary. I can see like on social media how it can have such a negative impact on anyone's brain, let alone a teenager's. Because this fascinates me, because as adults we try and protect our teenagers' brains, don't we? We want to almost have an influence and a say what they're exposed to and what they're not. But it seems like once we get to our adult age, we stop caring as much about what we expose ourselves to. So like, I wouldn't want my teenage daughter or son watching the news, reading the newspapers all day, eating crap food, drinking loads of booze. I wouldn't want that for my child, just because I know better. I know it's not good for you. Yet, like I say, as an adult, it's like that doesn't matter anymore. We'll expose ourselves to all these outside influences and external voices that make our life no better. Yeah. And it's, there's one thing. But yeah, the data's quite frightening, because it's a real sad situation when we think there's so many unhappy young people out there.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's very worrying, and it's definitely, there's definitely a part of it that is, this is the technology generation. They've just grown up with technology their whole lives, and what we have to remember is that our brains, in terms of our sort of generation, our species development, our brains are actually nowhere near able to keep up with the technology that we have. Yeah, you know, we process stuff in a much different way to how technology gives it to us. And of course, what we're seeing is things like attention spans are shortening because of, you know, how short TikTok videos are and other things like that. So, you know, so it's getting harder, you know, sometimes for people to sit down and watch a program, because it's like, right, it's been on for 10 minutes. It's like this really big commitment. And it's like, is it? Yeah. But I think the other side of it is looking at, obviously, the lockdowns haven't helped the last couple of years in terms of isolating teens at a time when they need to be out of the family. They need to be with their friends. They need to be socialising. They need to be figuring out who they are and finding their tribe. And to then say, sorry, guys, you guys have all got to stay in for 2 years and be with your families that you just don't really want to have to connect with on a biological level anymore, is enormously challenging. And I think, as we sort of touched on before, I think the ease of technology to not actually physically meet up with friends, even now we're out of lockdown, the habit is sort of formed of, well, we just chat online all night, and it's like, it's just not the same as being physically with your mates and having a laugh and stuff happening that way. And also the physical activity side of things as well. Yeah, no, you know, absolutely. Of not just getting out there and going for a walk. And when I was a teenager, we used to just walk around the streets all the time because there wasn't a park nearby, and we just used to roam around the streets every evening for about 2 hours. And I'm not saying that was a great thing either. We didn't get into any trouble or anything, but we were out the house though. We were all together. You're having a bit more of an easy laugh and a joke. The body language is all a part of it. You're out of a room, so the way your brain processes information when you're outside of a room is phenomenally different to when you're inside a room. You know, the limits with which being in a room has on your brain's ability to kind of think big picture, whereas as soon as you step outside, it's like, right, actually I feel like there's a lot more possible, because my brain is getting information from a much bigger area right now, and so it feels like it can think differently. And we've got teenagers sitting in their bedrooms on their tech all the time, and it's like, this isn't going to be good for your brain development. But going back to your point about what we consume in our brains, I completely agree with you. Part of my working on myself a good few years ago, probably about 10 years ago now, was realizing that actually some of the media I consumed just didn't make me feel good when I'd stopped using it. My brain got into the habit of, I wonder what's going on. I'll just check this website or this app and those sorts of things. And then I just realised that I'd come off it and be like, I don't actually feel very good. Not necessarily about myself. I don't feel happy. I don't feel motivated, things like that. So I had to really consciously think about, who do I want to follow online? Who, you know, how often do I want to use media and things like that? And understand that there are times when it might be that I'm between clients and I just think, do you know what? I'm just going to go on TikTok for 10 minutes because I just need chewing gum for the brain for a little bit to just get me out of this so that I'm ready for the next person that walks through the door. I have no problem with doing that because I know that it's my choice and I know why I'm doing it. But to sit in a bedroom and think, I've probably got 6 hours ahead of me because I've had my dinner and I'm not going to go to sleep for hours because I'm a teenager, and I'm just going to spend that trawling 6 hours just watching, 1, 2, 3 minute videos, just the next one. It's just like, that's not going to be good for your self-esteem, your self-worth, for how your brain's processing information. So I do agree with you that as much as we talk to kids about, you should eat better, eat your vegetables and all of those things, there is also a conversation to be had around, just think about the media you're consuming and whether it really makes you feel better after you've consumed it, or is it just wasting time?
Yeah, because it's all the same thing, right? If we're consuming something, it has a physiological effect, whether it's food, drink, information, reading, right? Whatever, we call it the palate. So something we're really careful on is, what are we taking in? But I think as adults, like, it's hard enough for us to monitor our own palate. Mm-hmm. Like, imagine being like 12 or 13. Like, we know as adults what a challenge not getting wrapped up in social media is. It's hard. Like, I know all the dangers, but it's still hard. So, like, being 12 or 13, wow, like that's really difficult. The only thing that I can think of, we have to lead the line well. So if you're a parent who's saying, don't be on your phone all day and you can't get through dinner as an adult without checking your email, like, you're a fucking hypocrite.
Oh, absolutely. You've got to lead by example. You have got to.
You can't tell your child to eat well if you're sitting on the couch slobbing eating crisps. You just can't. Like, my mum and dad, bless them, like, they smoked when we were young, so we smoked, but they had no right then to tell us not to smoke. Yeah. Well, they did, because they loved us and they knew the dangers, but they smoked. Yeah. We're not going to listen. Yeah. So it all comes back to the self, your own actions. It's the only way you can teach and lead, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. The difference is obviously that as adults, we have to learn that self-regulation, and as teenagers, they don't have that yet. So sometimes we have to do self-regulation for them. And sometimes we just have to have the conversation about, this is an opportunity for you to learn your own self-regulation now.
Yeah, but I guess my point is that if you were to sit me down as a parent and want to talk to me about nutrition because you knew it was good for me, so you wanted to help me self-regulate, but you were doing it whilst eating a packet of Doritos.
100%.
Yeah, I think that's where we've got to look at our own... And I think people have blinkers on this sometimes. They don't see it happening. They don't see their behaviours being passed down, literally handed over to their children. It's like, come on, like, this is the way we change the world, isn't it? Everyone has a look at themselves and says, what can I do? What can I do to make myself better? And that's the only way I can see out of this kind of mess that I think we've gotten ourselves into. It's the only way.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think also, when we talk about like the loneliness side of things, I think another way that parents need to lead by example is to show an active lifestyle.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
To show that they get up and they go for a run in the morning, or that they go to the gym, or they go to an evening class or something like that, or that they continue to learn. They go to a different sort of, not an exercise evening class, but they go to, I don't know, I'm going to learn a foreign language, or I'm going to, so to lead by example in those sorts of ways, so that the children realise that this isn't, I think there's a huge sort of myth about, and I remember buying into it myself when I was younger, which is at a certain point I become an adult. And I think, thinking back now, I had somehow thought that I then became a different person, like the final version of me. Like there was this, well, I'm an adult now, so the change is done kind of thing. And it's like, of course it isn't, because hopefully you take your inner child with you throughout your whole life. But what parents can do as well in supporting is to show themselves being social. Yeah. And I think there's a couple of things there. In fact, that reminds me of something we were talking about earlier. I think parents having a good circle of friends and showing how they navigate that, how they communicate, how they socialise. I think that's really, really important to children. Having grown up with parents who didn't have friends and still don't necessarily overly socialise, it's interesting that my brother and I both have really, really concrete, firm friendships that we've had for years and years, and new people have come along the way, but friends is really, really important to both of us. And I like the fact that our two girls are getting to see that and getting to experience that and getting to see what healthy and what long-term historical kind of friendships look like and the benefits of them. Because one day, you know, the people that are my friends will be the closest thing I have to family, because they're the people that will have all my history. They're the people that will talk about it. So I think there's a lot of things like that where we need to look as parents and as adults, as we said before, to the example that we are setting. Definitely.
I know just my community has changed my life more than anything. I think just putting myself around people who want to be decent and good and even have conversations like this with you. Seriously, I cannot under kind of like sell the importance of how much they changed my life. Just learning off people, listening, learning how to listen as well. It's a skill, and hearing new views, new concepts, being challenged, realizing there's other things to pursue in life that are not material, such as knowledge and truth, and you know, it does change. Like I'm a big believer in the basics of like you've got to be really careful what you feed yourself, and that's not food. I'm talking information, conversation. Like you say, the friends that you're with, they play such a role, and we need to. I think the first thing we need to do is understand the importance of that. Yeah, I'm a different person if I'm around bad people. After a while, it's gonna get me eventually. It does,
yeah. It will influence, absolutely, and it's an interesting one, because I think it leads on to then how do we do conflict. Because I think that's something that a lot of people really struggle with, is how do I do conflict? And I think, again, that stems from childhood, because the majority of children, they may or may not see their parents argue. They virtually never see how their parents resolve an argument, because parents just don't resolve arguments in front of kids. They might have a row, they might have a disagreement, they might have an argument, and it'll be like, right, well, let's just leave it for now. Let's go off and do this thing that we've got to do. And then at some point, mum and dad are okay again. And it never happens in front of the kids. The parents don't come together and go, do you know what, my bad, that wasn't okay. That was me. I accept that, you know, apologies or whatever. And the other person go, actually, I did this as well, so that's fine. Kids don't get taught how to deal with conflict by having a healthy example set for them. And that's why so many people are really poor at conflict.
You know what, I've never thought about that. That's so fucking true. It really is. It is. Like, you get taught how to argue, but yeah, even just saying that, I'm like, light bulb. This is why I love podcasting, because I'm like, there's always like nuggets of gold that go away with me, and I just think, yeah, we've never been taught how to deal with conflict resolution. Like, never taught how to end an argument. Wow. Yeah. Or how to solve something. Yeah. Because usually it's who shouts the loudest, or it's about me proving you wrong.
Or who walks off, or all of those things. It's whoever's going to give in first. It's generally what most people think is how you resolve conflict.
Because you call yourself the confidence coach, but you do a lot with emotional, is it resilience, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sort of communication, confidence, resilience. Yeah.
And all these things, I can clearly see how everything merges together. So I know we're talking about conflict, but emotional intelligence and emotional resilience, like they all merge. And even back to what you originally said, which was a lot of the clients, the underlying truth is I don't feel good enough. I don't feel good enough. All these things link. So where do you start to like piece all of this together? So like confidence on its own is a separate topic to me. Like I can see a big link between confidence and resilience. Because for me, confidence is built off the back of wins. Like I don't know whether, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't think we can bullshit our way into believing we're confident. I think you have to go and earn a little bit of backing up your own word to gain the trust in yourself, so that you've got the confidence when you say you're going to do something, you believe that you might do it. How do you teach these things to people? How do you unravel them? How do you even deal with someone who's not even aware of all this shit that's going on?
I think the place that I always start is to understand what brought the person to get in touch with me in the first place,
which is usually pain, right?
Yeah, it is. It is pain of some sort. Yes, whether that's a relationship pain, whether that's work pain, whether that's personal pain in terms of just not liking who they are, or feeling stuck, or not feeling confident, or having anxiety, or having depression, and all of those things. So we always start with, well, what brought you to get in touch? And then the way that I always lead it is, I guess the first couple of sessions is the way that I describe it to clients is it's a little bit like us taking out a jigsaw puzzle and throwing all the pieces out. And then we turn them over and we start looking for the corners and the edges. And then we do the hard work of filling in the middle to understand what the picture actually is.
Yeah, I like that analogy. I'm guessing the pain that they come to you with must no longer be tolerable.
Yes, I think that's fair enough. Doesn't mean that it's pain as in overwhelming, but it's got to a point where they're just like, this is not. I've had enough. Exactly. Yeah, perfect way to put it. And so for the first couple of sessions, it really, we talk about what's brought them to get in touch, but I don't go straight into that because we've got to go broad before we go deep.
So these edges that you talk of, what are the edges? Are they like, let's work out what your values are, let's work out what your problems are? What are the edges?
The edges are, let's talk about your life.
Okay.
So you tell me who you are. Tell me who's in your life. Tell me who's important. Tell me anything that you think is significant from your life. What's good, what's bad, what's difficult, what don't you want to go near, which I'm not going to push anyone towards until they're ready. But let's just talk about, so to tell me who's in your life, who are the people, what are the places, what have you done with your life? Where is it at right now? And what's been the whole? It's very interesting how incredibly cathartic it is for clients to sit down and tell me their life story, which is right. So you were born, who was in the family, what happened next? And to tell me almost chronologically their life story. And most people go, oh my God, I have never done that before. And it's like, no, why would you? Who is generally going to sit down and say, please tell me from birth, what do you remember?
There's an element of guilt behind it. So if we shut off the cameras now and you said, look, Alex, I want to help you out, like, let's have an hour session. I'd be like, Lydia, you don't want to hear my shit. Like, I don't want to pour that onto you. Like, you got, even if I was paying you and it was your job role, I'd be like, you don't want to hear this. I'd almost feel sorry for you that you've got to hear all this bullshit.
But that's my passion.
I know. I get it.
It's it just doesn't. It's absolutely fine to me. Like I don't walk away with the weight of that. I walk away with that's really interesting, and my brain's like ding 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 ding, finding connections in places, because it's really hard when it's your story and it's your lived experience. Sometimes it's really hard for people to see all of the connections. Some people come to me and they've got a really decent level of self-awareness, and it's like, yeah, I can see that this linked to this and this linked to that. But sometimes there are big themes that are going on, and it takes somebody outside of you to go, you do realise that there was this situation here, and then this, what you thought was totally unrelated because it's in a, I don't know, it was a personal situation to begin with, and then there's this professional thing. You do realise the theme that adds those two things together, and people are like, okay, and that's the work that we do. And then we work through that stuff, and it's then about talk to people and saying, okay, well, when do you want to come back? Because I don't work with you've got to come in every week and you've got to come at this time and this is your slot.
That's interesting.
It's not something that ever worked for me, because sometimes you're ready to talk in a week and sometimes you're just not, and sometimes life happens and people turn up and they're like, I've just been so busy, I don't know what to say. And that's fine, I can navigate that with you. But I'd rather you turn up feeling like, yeah, I've had enough space between sessions to come back and feel like I've got something that I want to say this time.
The danger with that for me was that the resistance would push me away. Like if you got close to something that I felt like you were touching on that was, important or difficult, that might be my excuse to open the window and run out.
Yeah.
Whereas, like I have psychotherapy every week. Okay. And some weeks I'm ready and some weeks I'm not, but I turn up regardless. And sometimes the ones where I'm not ready, there's usually a reason. And we discover something in that session. Yeah. It's a bit like the gym, like those sessions that you don't want to do are usually the ones you need to fucking do.
Yeah.
Like leg day. Guys will always skip leg day because it's hard. But actually, you need to do leg day. So there's an element, again, I think this is the individual. Some people are, if they're backed into a corner, no.
Yeah.
Not, but I kind of like that heat on me. Yeah, I'd like you to say, no, Alex, you're not getting out this time. The door's shut. We're going for this. But I guess you have to be careful of who you do that and when you do that.
Absolutely, and there's a classic thing in any form of talking therapy, which is clients generally really unintentionally will drop a huge bomb with about 5 minutes to go to the end of the session.
Gotta do that.
Because that's the safe time to do it, which is I'm going to leave this with you and now I can leg it because we don't have to talk about it now. And then I've got a week to mull over, how do I avoid that if I want to next time?
Okay.
Or what if he holds my feet to the flames and makes me talk about that? And it's like, okay, well, I've got a week to prep for that. So
yeah, I guess the ambition is always the same, is to get to the centre of the issue. But I guess some people will jump in the shallow end and slowly paddle towards it.
Yeah.
Whereas some people might just go, no, fuck that, let's dive in.
Yeah. And I was a dive in. As I said, when I went to Safeline, I was like, let's dive in, let's do this, because I'm sick and tired of this stuff. Let's do this. And it was hard and it was brutal at times. And I thought I was going to break at times, but it was like, I'm just not letting this go because I want out the other side of it. But there are loads and loads of people. There were people in my group therapy sessions that were just like, I have to tinker around the edges of this because it's too painful.
Yeah.
And that's the characteristic, that's the experience, and that's just about allowing people to be themselves and saying, look, I'm here when you want me, but I'm not going to force you to come and see me. So it requires them to have the motivation to say, I do still want to keep going with this, actually.
Yeah, and in the line of work I do, I can relate to that totally. If I'm nagging someone, I know it's not right. They've got to want to do or be willing to do the work at some point. Touching on the resilience aspect, this is something I love talking about, resilience, because I've taught myself how to be more resilient over time. But when we're talking about not being good enough, do you think there's a space and a time where it's okay to say to someone, oh, well, actually, you might be right, like how you're behaving right now and the way that you're turning up every day is, it's not good enough. You are not good enough right now. Is there a place and time for that where you can say it? Because I know some therapies will, of course you're good enough. Like, right? And while there's an element of truth to that, I think it's not what many people need to hear. It hurts maybe being told, you're not doing good enough right now. You're not good enough right now.
I think it's, rather than it being told, I guess what you're trained as a therapist is, it's always about asking open questions.
Yeah, therapists are so good at that.
So it is the question of, how do you think this is going? What do you think about your... I'm fine, thank you. What do you think about your effort level at the moment? Are you okay with that? Like, have you got other stuff going on that means that this actually is your best right now?
Is that your therapy voice?
Yeah,
you just turned into therapy voice. Yeah. But okay, that makes sense. So you get them to decide whether they're being good enough or not.
Yeah.
What if their intuition and gut is all off, and you can see that they're not? Like, is a therapist's job to just unveil light bulbs for the client, or can you step in and say, well, actually, I'm noticing something that you might not be noticing here? Yeah,
100%. That's certainly my style anyway. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a super soft person. You may have picked up on. So
but you're very nice.
Oh, thank you.
Like, you're very. I can tell you would never do anything out of other than good intent. And I guess this goes back to what we were just saying. Everyone's different. Yeah. I love it when my therapist calls me out and says, actually, Alex, have you thought about it like this? Because what you're saying might not be right. I need that, because if I can take the piss, I probably will. Same in relationships. Like, I need someone who's going to say, Alex, you're taking the piss, or I need that. I need that. But I like that kind of mentorship. I consider that quite loving when someone, if someone's trying to help me and will give me it straight, regardless of whether it hurts my feelings or not, I really respect them for it. Because it's a hard thing to do, to be honest, to someone.
It is, and it's a good sign of how much you trust your therapist. That's a really good sign that you are prepared to have someone say.
I've been working with them for years, that's why. Yeah,
and that's great. And that's the beauty of having a longer term relationship with the therapist, is you can just keep picking up where you need to.
Well, I don't get the whole I'm going to go to therapy for a few sessions. It's the equivalent for me of I'm going to go to the gym a few times. I don't get it.
Yeah,
I'm like,
and expect that all the results will be there and they'll stay forever.
Yeah, or like, I'll do 6 weeks. I'm like, no. Like, you either want to improve, and you don't need to put an expiry date on it. Just keep going, keep doing the work. Like, you never stop training your mind or your brain, or you never stop learning more about emotions. And I don't see why people wouldn't do that. Like I say, just like the physical. Like, if you stop going gym, you get smaller and you get weaker. So I think therapy is the same. I would encourage everyone's there. I remember having a guy called Paul Foster on here. He's the Michelin star restaurant owner in Stratford. And he said that he didn't even know what his issues were until he went to therapy. And his life is so much better now. He didn't know he had some issues. His girlfriend did, and she encouraged him, will you try this for me? It was only until someone showed him a new way to live and opened his eyes to these things did he realise that he was unavailable a lot of the time, emotionally unavailable, didn't have empathy. It was only until someone showed him. It's
the 4 stages of consciousness, of competency. So we start off, and forgive me, but I always use driving as an example for this. So we start off unconsciously incompetent.
Yes.
We do not know what we do not know until we've actually got in a car and somebody says, right, start the engine and drive.
Sure.
At that moment, when somebody says, start the engine and drive, you become consciously incompetent. You suddenly realise you don't know how to drive. You might have watched your parents drive, but you haven't actually ever really done it yourself, and you don't realise how many different aspects there are to driving. Then as you learn to drive, you get to a point where you're ready to take your test. At that moment, you are consciously competent, which is if I think about everything that I'm doing, I am actually competent at driving. And that's the day when they go, you passed your test.
Sure.
You then fall into the category that most of us are in, which is we are now unconsciously competent. I don't think about the fact that I drive. I don't think about the mechanisms. I don't think about the fact that I have to check my mirrors or the different things that my hands and feet are doing at different times. My brain just does all that stuff for me. I am now unconsciously competent at driving. So those are the 4 stages that everybody goes through in therapy. There will always be something that you are unconsciously incompetent at.
Sure.
It is sticking with it long enough to find out what it is, or it's trying it in the first place, like the example of Paul Foster, where he was just unconsciously incompetent. He didn't realise he didn't know this stuff.
No, I get it, but I haven't had a driving lesson since I was 18, so nearly 20 years ago. If you were in the car with me now, you'd be like that. You would not pass your test driving like that.
No, I wouldn't.
One hand on the wheel, chilling out, cruising. So it's like you get complacent, and therapy is another way for me not to get complacent. Because there's not if pain is the driver for a lot of behavioural change, which it's always been in my case. When that pain goes, you can easily slip back. So this is why you see people who are overweight, they feel so terrible about themselves, they look in the mirror and go, I need to do something. They start to see changes, they feel good about themselves, the motivator, which was the pain, has gone, so they go right back to the start, and their new motivator becomes pain. Only this time it has to get a little bit more painful than it was last time. So it's like, can we change people's values whilst they're going through that change? But the values for me only change off the back of behaving a certain way. So how can I explain this well? I will value something after a period of time when I've become better at it. So, for example, with health and fitness, I value it because I give it so much time and attention. I wouldn't value it otherwise. So values are a tricky one for me, where you have to invest something in them. So if you want values to be love and trust, surely you have to place some attention on that. But if you don't value them at the time, why would you place time and attention on them? So it's this tricky area to get going. You probably value it more now because you've dedicated your whole life to it. Yeah,
I think there's probably a slight difference in terms of how, or to my mind anyway, in terms of how you and I talk about values. Because I think for me, if I was to think about mental health and physical health, they are really important to me. And they give me lots of benefits. I guess my mental health is supported firstly by my physical health, but also my mental health is supported by me living what I consider to be my values, which are these qualities of how I live, as opposed to things around me, or not material things, but I can't think of the right words right now, but I guess mental and physical health are achievements.
Wouldn't that be an example of love, though? So from you working out and eating well, your statement is, I care about myself.
Yeah.
Therefore, because really, if you're 5 stone overweight and not moving, if we cut the shit, and said, well, do you respect yourself? And therefore, do you love yourself? Because if you loved yourself, you'd respect yourself.
Yes.
So that is, when we talk about values of love, it's that's exercise.
Yeah.
That's good food. In my...
It is. No, and I really agree with you on that. I guess to me, it's that love is the thing that is beneath the physical and the mental health,
sure.
which is, that's the driver for me.
Yes.
Is I have to show self-love.
Got you.
Because, and one of the ways that I do that is staying physically active. And I know that benefits my mental health, but it comes back to sometimes showing yourself self-love can be really, really challenging because you don't feel you want. So to me, that's where it comes back to a value as opposed to an achievement, which is I am achieving self-love by being physically healthy. And that gives me the benefit.
Oh, no, I think I'm on the same page with you.
Yeah.
I think I've probably just gone the other route. That's why I train.
Yes.
It's a statement of self-respect. My value is self-respect.
Perfect.
And one of the ways I show that is taking care of myself. And one of the ways I display taking care of myself is food and nutrition. So I think we're probably saying the same kind of thing. It's just not gone right. Yeah. I think I think with guys, I always lead in with like the more achievement-based language because it's more appealing. It's like, here's the tunnel to what you really want. Yeah,
if you talk to a load of guys who have come for physical fitness about, right, let's talk about self-love, it's going to be like, whoo, tumbleweed moment. Absolutely. Yeah. What I love in that is that respect is one of your values then.
Yeah.
So then respect should be a challenge in terms of how do I keep showing other people respect, even if I feel disrespected.
Oh, I like that.
So that's where it pushes you, that if respect is one of your values, is I respect myself and I demonstrate that to myself all the time by eating well and physically training and those things. But how do I continue to show other people respect? And that's where the rub should come with any value that you have, is there should be moments where it's really hard, but that's the time that you have to rise above and go, how do I show respect to someone when they're showing, and respect to myself in the same moment that somebody is showing me disrespect.
Yeah, that's great. One of the issues I have with values is I think people like on certain courses are asked just to select them. I'm more of the view is we know what your values are by what you're doing. And if you don't follow those values, you'll fall out of alignment and there'll be a lot of pain in your life. So I know that when I move away from self-care and self-respect, I'm really miserable. And sometimes I have to sit back and detach, like we spoke about, and say, why are you feeling so miserable? And then you realise, I've been nasty to this person, or I've been nasty to myself, and it's gone against the values that I really want in life. I want to be a kind man, of course I do. And if I display unkindness, like it really hits me hard now. I get depressed. So it's like, your values are, I believe, what you do every single day.
Yes.
And that's where the art of discipline and resilience comes in. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's when you're talking about that in terms of, if I feel like I haven't managed the situation well.
Yes.
Because I agree with you. Values to me are about us embracing our authenticity. Who am I really? Well, my values will tell me that. They'll challenge me at times, but I already know what they are. I don't need to just sit down and go, right, make up what your values are. I need to think internally and think, actually, what's really important? Like, how do I want to be treated by other people, by myself, and how do I want to treat other people?
Yeah.
That's where I already know what my values are. I've just never articulated them before.
Yes.
But if I'm coming to a place where it's I feel like I've been unkind to somebody, that brings us back to conflict resolution, which is, how do I take responsibility for that? How do I learn from it? And how do I learn not to be triggered by that person, that situation, that type of event, whatever? Again, and what can I learn from the fact that triggered me in the first place? Why did it? What was it about what happened that triggered me, that led me to go against my own values, to be unkind? I must have felt threatened in some emotional way.
Can you be a part-time psychopath? So can you be like 95% of the time switched on, kind, empathetic, but then there is this part of you, and I say a part because I believe that's how I break it down and visualise it, that is pure fucking off the tracks, psychopath, out of control. Because you hear the phrase, I just saw red. And you're like, that's not me, or that's not like him. But like, for that moment, they just flip. Like, can you be part-time psychopath? And what is that? And how do you control that part of you?
You can't be a part-time psychopath, because unfortunately that requires the either complete lack of empathy or the ability to empathise. And as I said before, psychopaths just don't get empathy. They can't read feelings, they can't read emotions, they don't feel guilt, they don't feel shame or anything like that.
So you can't switch then between.
No.
So you can't be someone who feels guilt and then doesn't feel guilt in that moment.
In that moment, you're not feeling guilt because there's so much shame about what you're doing. So it's like it's called the shield of shame that comes up and makes us go, I can't process what I just did. So guilt is I did the wrong thing. Shame is I am the wrong thing.
Okay.
So shame often comes up when there's guilt. The shield of shame comes up and it's like cannot process because that means that I'm a terrible person and I've got to correct this. And then that brings me back to conflict resolution, but it also brings me back to how do I fit that I just did into the story of who I've decided I am, because that isn't coherent with who I am. So what I think we're talking about here is much more about triggers and attachment styles. So in attachment styles, you can either be secure or insecure. So secure attachment styles is I have a really, really good understanding of who I am as a person. And I can connect in a really healthy way with other people. And if through death or accident or something like that, somebody leaves my life, I will be really, I will properly grieve for that, but it will not fundamentally change who I am as a person. I'm not going to have to then go, I've got to build myself back up again and reinvent myself because that partner's left me and I've morphed into them. So that's the secure attachment style, is you don't morph into your partner and they don't morph into you. That's less than 50% of the population have a secure attachment style, because that requires you to have two parents who both had secure attachment styles for you to be brought up with that. You can learn it as an adult. The insecure attachment style breaks down into three different areas. You can be anxious attachment style, avoidant attachment style, or ambivalent attachment style. So anxious attachment style is I'm based on a real primary level. I'm afraid that you're going to leave me or something bad is going to happen. So I hang on quite tight to the people that mean the most to me. But I can be a little bit suffocating over that and possibly a little bit controlling with it too. Because I don't want you to go away.
Of course.
Because that would crush me and I would lose a part of myself.
And like, the worst thing about that one is the more that you love someone, the worse that control can become.
Yes.
Because you're so terrified.
The avoidant attachment style comes from the exact same place, which is I'm terrified that you're going to leave me, but actually therefore I kind of always just keep one foot or a toe out of the door, so that when the inevitable day comes, because it's going to happen, that you leave me, I can justify it and say, well, I wasn't that attached anyway. It does really hurt, but I'm going to try and style it out a little bit more. What we know is that anxious and avoidant attachment styles are like magnets to each other. They are super, super toxic for each other, because what tends to happen in a romantic, intimate relationship scenario is the avoidant attachment style comes along, sees the anxious attachment style and whisks them off their feet. Oh my God, and it's all fairy tale, it's movie love. And then what happens is the avoidant person puts the anxious attachment style on a pedestal. They are the most perfect person I have ever met. The anxious person then, being a human being, shows some form of fallibility. And it could be anything. It could be they don't load the dishwasher in the right way. It could be big, it could be small. It's generally pretty insignificant. It could just be, we were having a chat about ex-partners one day, and the anxious person said they've had, 15 different lovers in their life, and the avoidant person just goes, well, that's too many in my book. I've just decided that doesn't make me feel good. And that's the thing. They don't verbalise it, they just start to withdraw at that moment. And so the anxious person, the anxious attachment style, begins to feel the withdrawal of the avoidant. And so they cling on even tighter because they've been made to feel wonderful. I mean, they've been up on this pedestal. This is movie love. This is the real deal this time. This one's going to be different to all the others. And they feel the avoidant start to move away, so they grab on even tighter. And that makes the avoidant person go, oh God, this is even worse, and step away more. And what ends up is a cat and mouse situation, where you have the anxious person grabbing on more and more and the avoidant person withdrawing more and more. And unfortunately, that is why the vast majority of marriages end in divorce, because they are anxious and avoidant attachment style marriages. The third and final one is ambivalent attachment style. So ambivalent attachment style is a mixture of the two. It is the push-pull. So ambivalent attachment styles generally tend to come from traumatic childhoods where children's needs just haven't been consistently met. That's not to say that there's been abuse or anything like that. It's just this inconsistency of need being met, and they just feel very much like, I don't know whether you're safe or not, so I grab onto you in a really anxious way and go, oh my God, you're going to be my everything. And then they go, oh my God, I feel totally overwhelmed by what I've done. I need to push you away now. And then go, oh God, you're leaving. No, I'll change, come back again. And then it's like, oh no, I can't do this. It's too hard. Right, you need to go. No, don't go. And so that's the ambivalent attachment style, is the push-pull. You're smiling.
I'm smiling, yes. I'm sorry. I feel like you're talking to me. Yeah. Well, one of the things that makes, I think, this podcast so relatable is I certainly don't sit here and pretend I've got all my shit figured out. And it's just fascinating hearing you break it down like that. It's almost like an equation of like, it makes sense.
Good. And that's why I do this sort of therapy.
Yeah, it's cool.
Trained very broadly, because to me, there's never been one therapy where I said, right, if I'm trained in, I don't know, CBT or psychodynamic therapy, that's going to fit everyone who walks through the door. Because it just, to me, that's never felt complete. It's the more I know about lots and lots of different theories, the more I can be client focused, and I can say, well, you tell me about you, and I'll bring in all sorts of different theories that will help you create a framework of going, okay, I think I'm starting to understand myself better now. I understand why I do this. I understand why I'm not doing that. I'm it's all starting to make sense, but how I work with you might be quite different to how I work with somebody else.
No, absolutely. I always said when I started this podcast and be, in the coaching game, that I would never ever pretend that I've got all my shit sorted, ever. And I see myself more like a facilitator now. So I'll bring amazing people like yourself on the podcast that can spread the message through this channel that not only helps me, but obviously reaches other people. And I think it's just a nice way to do it. It becomes like your network and your community of, like, this podcast is dedicated to raising topics like this, because the amount of messages I get from people that say thanks for talking about that, because it's something I'm so uncomfortable talking about, the fact that you had that conversation. So jealousy and stuff like that is quite an embarrassing emotion to talk about for a lot, especially for men. Like, it doesn't feel like you should experience it, and it brings up that shame shield that you were talking about. You feel ashamed that you're so scared that your partner might abandon you, because it feels weak.
And that's what then creates that anger where you said, can I be a part-time psychopath? It's that bit of, I'm going into avoidance. I don't care, just leave, just get out. This is not, I can't do this anymore. I just don't want this. Yeah. And then the shield of shame comes up, and then the anxiety attachment style comes back, and then it's like, God, I shouldn't have done that. Oh God, how am I going to put this right? And I don't feel like I've necessarily got the conflict resolution skills to do it. But then, as you said, I mean, jealousy is an enormous emotion, and everybody feels it at different times. But it is probably the least talked about emotion with children.
With children, yeah, okay.
So again, bringing that into what we're then brought up with, is you're not talking. Parents don't tend to display jealousy. They don't verbalise jealousy. They might verbalise bitchiness, which is generally jealousy hidden. I can't believe it, and it's like, why does that bother you so much? Yeah. But it's not talked about with kids. It's just, well, let them have it, and don't, or don't be that.
I'm writing a book at the minute, and it's all about jealousy. It's had that much of an impact in my life. It's really damaged it, and I didn't know. I just didn't know. I remember having my first girlfriend when I was probably 16. And we'd left school, we met at school, and we were getting on great, and we'd listen to music together on our lunch. Everything was perfect. And then she started a job in a travel agents. And then one night I was with her, and a male boss called her, and it weren't about work. They were just getting on, mates and stuff. And I just remember, I did not like it. Silent treatment. Said to her, like, he can't call again. And I didn't even know it was a problem. It just felt normal to react like that. Just normal. I didn't even question it. It's only now that I look back and think, fucking hell, that was really unhealthy. Really unhealthy. But again, it had never been talked about, never been taught. I didn't even know what jealousy was. I know that sounds crazy.
No, it doesn't.
It was just, this is how I feel.
Yeah.
This is my way of resolving the issue.
Yeah.
Stick my chest out. Let's storm in. Let's fucking get it sorted. And it worked, because I kicked off a bit, and he never called again. So I thought I'd solved the problem.
Yeah.
And then the next relationship, guess what? Got a bit worse. And the one after that, bit worse.
Right.
And then before you know it, it's like, fucking hell, there's a problem here. Big problem.
And sorry to jump in, but what's interesting in that is you almost, and you corrected yourself, you almost said I won.
But that's how it felt.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what jealousy creates in us.
Yeah.
Is that feeling of I'm losing.
Yeah.
I have to win again.
And you do win for that, for the split second in your own crazy mind. You do win for a minute until the very next time. Which again, unless you want a partner who's just going to sit at home in a long pair of jeans and a Wally jumper and never go out, like, you kind of get what you want, and then you lose the attraction anyway.
Yes.
So the thing that you loved about the person, which was their vibrant energy and their enthusiasm for life and the fact that they're bubbly and everyone likes them, it's like, that's the thing you fucking hate, because that's the threat. Yeah, everyone likes them. I can't have that.
That's why freedom is one of my values.
Yes, I spoke about freedom the other week, and the freedom for me is to not let those emotions determine how I behave. That would be real freedom for me. So I can experience these things without them taking over me and forcing me. And I say forcing, like, I know it's my responsibility. I'm probably using the wrong terminology, but you know what I mean. To be able to detach would be my freedom. That's what I see autonomy as. It's not doing whatever I want in life. It's being able to control myself and the self-discipline. But this is where I think it's so hard to know who you are. If 1 minute you're the nicest guy on the planet, and that's genuine, like, you really are being kind out of nothing but authenticity, and then something makes you jealous and you're this horrible fucking person. It's like, well, who am I? That's where it becomes a challenge to work out who, because you think then you're this horrible, nasty person. You might not be. You just can't detach from these emotions.
Yeah. And I think, that's, coming back to what you talked about earlier about the thoughts, feelings, emotions, actions, behaviours. We have on average 64,000 thoughts a day.
And they're mostly the same, right?
They are.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They are just, over 90% of them are repetitions. Yesterday, the day before. What we also know is that the human brain is wired for a negative bias.
Yes.
It takes us 0.08 of a second to remember a negative situation, experience, anything like that. It takes us almost a full 10 seconds, between 8 and 10 full seconds, to remember and commit a positive experience to our memory.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So we are, and understandably, we have a negative bias. If, donkeys years ago, if we didn't remember where the poison berries were and we went back and ate them again the next day, we ain't going to be alive for very long.
Sure.
So we have to remember the threats and things like that. But it's that understanding that I have agency over my thoughts, because 50% of them will be negative, but 50% of them will be positive. It's up to me to tune my brain into which ones come out in big and bold. And for a lot of people, particularly people that haven't been in therapy, the vast majority of their thoughts are very, very negative, and they come out like in big, bold font, and they see them, and they talk to themselves in the most harsh ways. I say to clients, if I had 10 people following you around all day, telling you the worst things you think about yourself constantly on repeat, in less than an hour, you would be sitting in the corner of the room crying, going, oh my God, please make this stop. And yet that's what's going on inside our heads. And whereas the positive thoughts tend to come out in this sort of smaller, fainter font, and we don't recognise them, we don't see them as much. And it's about tuning in, and again, it comes back to values. The more I do things that are trustworthy, or of me trusting other people, or showing freedom, or honesty, or love, the more I'm fueling the positive narrative that I hear in my voice all of the time. And I tune into that stuff more and more, and as time goes on, the more I do it, the more I see it, and the less likely I am actually to get triggered in a negative situation, because now I've got more of a balance of positive experiences where I've shown I can trust myself than I have of negative ones.
No, that's brilliant. I'd love you to come and speak to the guys inside my coaching program, because the way you articulate the benefits of these things is far superior than what I can do. So I know the advantages of every day. I sit at the end of the day and I write 5 to 10 things that I would call wins, or that are, behaviours that I've displayed that I'm happy with. So you start to stack up evidence that you promote these things, that you do these things. And the cool thing about that is, if you can't find the wins in your day, you either open your eyes wider, or you start to create things that would be good. So like I say, if you want to be a guy who's takes care of himself, you actively say, well, what can I do today that would display that?
Yes.
So it would be amazing to get you into the group if you would like to do that, and speak to the guys on a private level about the importance of how we can change our behaviours and thoughts, because that would be brilliant. What's next for you now? Because I've got a list of your qualifications and achievements, and it's amazing. So what is next for you?
I guess I don't have a firm kind of right, this is what I'm on to achieving. One of the big things for me is being a mum at the moment. That's really important to me, as well as obviously being able to pay the bills and all of those sorts of things. You asked earlier about, do you ever feel ready to be a parent? I think for me, it was understanding that there's a massive difference between I want to have a baby versus I want to be a parent. One is a possession. I want to have this thing. The other is, who do I want to be? Yeah. And that was the place that I got to. I was never actually particularly like, oh my God, I want a baby. I was just like, I just got to the point where I was like, I really, really want to be a parent. I want to experience that. I know it's going to be really, really challenging. And I didn't take an easy route with it either. But that's for another day. But I think so. I think that's really important to me. I think it's continuing to look after myself, and I think it's the family side of things has changed a lot for me in the last couple of years. So that's massively a focus for me. But I think professionally, it's, and I say sorry in a good way, it's changed.
Yes. Oh yeah, I assumed. Yeah.
But I think sort of professionally for me, I would like to get to a point where I'm able to raise the platform a little bit more. My work with Safeline is fundamentally important to me. To me, that's a lifelong relationship. Sure. For very understandable reasons. But I think where I can to, just to continue helping people and to kind of get the word out there and to share tools and techniques that could help people in any way, just using media and things like that. But it's to keep doing what I'm doing. I was supposed to be doing my master's, but family life took over and I was like, I've got to make a choice here. Sure, yeah. Between doing a master's and being a mum and being a mum one. And that's fine, and that was the right decision. But I would ultimately still love to get towards doing my PhD at some point.
That's really cool.
So that's...
Yeah, I mean, we won't go into this because, again, I could speak to you for hours and this would be a different topic. But I think, parent is so undervalued. When people say, one of my main goals is to be a parent, I'm like, I can't think of anything more inspiring than just having positive relationships that impact people's lives, whether it's parents or not. Just... like you said during lockdown, when you take away those relationships, for me, there's nothing more important. Yeah. Career is important to me, but it's nowhere near as important as who I am and the impact that I have on other people. Yeah. It's nowhere near. I don't care what anyone says. Career is just one thing. It's not who you are.
Yes.
It's just one thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why being a parent is so important to me, because that's where I get challenged to be the best version of me the most.
Sure, I get that.
And that's where I've seen the most, not the most growth, but I think to be a person that I, having had a lot of friends that I really respect and admire, and they all had their kids earlier than me, and watching them go through that and just thinking, God, if I could be a parent like that, if I could be like that, having felt that I was just a shell for so long, to live in a world now where every day I go, I don't think I'm that different to the qualities that I have respected and admired in my friends for so long. That is incredibly rewarding to me. And in a kind of, it could probably sound a little bit egotistical, as in I'm a parent because it makes me feel good about myself. But actually the self-development for me that has come from that is so incredible in terms of the evidence of I can be a normal person, and for so long I didn't feel like a normal person at all. So to get there and say I think I'm functioning like all the other adults that I see, I find that just hugely rewarding, because that's more of that positive information, those positive experiences, those positive memories of me continuing on my self-growth.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the time.
Whenever there's someone that you see that you respect or admire, if anyone ever messaged me and say, Alex, I respect you for doing the podcast, so I always say, well, what do you respect about it? What do you like? And then they'll flag out something, and I'll say, well, where does that show up in your own life? And it always does. If I respect something in someone, it's either because I have that quality or it's because I want more of that quality. So I think it's cool to look around at the parents and say, well, why do I like the way they're parenting their child? What do I respect about them? What do I admire about them? Because it's in you. And it's probably a good sign of where we should be putting some of our attention. It's like, I respect the fact that person's patient and empathetic. Maybe that's who I want to be a little bit more of as well.
And I think I used that a huge amount with my friendships, was when I was not feeling like I was a normal person. I think I looked at my friendships a lot. I think the other thing that I do respect myself for is my marriage.
Yeah.
And actually having a really, really healthy relationship with someone, and the challenges that come with that, and how we navigate it, and how I see on a daily basis that I think about how I'm going to communicate that, how I'm going to phrase that, what am I going to say, what do I want out of it. I always go into things with what do I want at the end of this, how do I want the other person to feel, and how do I want to feel. That influences how I communicate enormously. Makes total sense to me.
So I'll go away today and go, well, what do I like about Lydia? Okay, she spoke really clearly and articulate. Well, that's something I want to get better at. Is obsessed with growth and learning. That's something I really... Do you know what I mean? So it's the answers are always there if we open our eyes. I've got one more question, if that's all right, because we've nearly done 2 hours.
Okay. Oh, amazing! Wow, cool. Gosh, that's gone so quickly.
No, it's been really cool. I knew it would be cool, because when you say you're a psychology nerd, I was like, we're gonna have some fun. It'll be really cool.
Yeah, no, it has. It's been awesome.
This is a traditional one that often like people go, "Ooh, I need time to think." But yeah, what does Lydia Hall need to work on now to become a better person, or where do you put your energy now in terms of your growth and development?
I think it probably comes across a few different facets for me. I think intellectually I need to feel challenged. I'm looking forward to the girls being of an age where I can perhaps step up the physical health side of things. There are some things I'd like to achieve there.
Okay.
Things that I haven't ever tried before that I think would be really good. I think for me, I have a tradition of, on New Year's Eve, doing a mind map for what are the things that I would like to move towards, not to necessarily achieve, because sometimes I'm not very good with a very clear goal. You know, people always say, you'd be really good in sales. I'm like, I wouldn't, because as soon as you give me a target, I'm like, well, I don't want to do it anymore. So what are the things that I would like to move towards in the coming year? And I think that sort of a practice really helps just guide me. It's nothing that I hold myself to in an awful way. And there were years where the same things were on there year after year and I wasn't getting any closer to them. And then suddenly one year it dropped and it was like, yep, I've achieved that now, or I've got much closer to it, or I'm on the road to that. I think, I think it's just very multifaceted. I think I like to look at all the different aspects of my life and take responsibility for them. You know, one of the things that I learned massively in my therapeutic journey as a client was the wounds were not my fault, but the healing of them was my responsibility. And that is something that I hold to, which is I am responsible for myself, and I really, really want to like myself. So what do I need to do to make sure that keeps happening?
Are you there at that level now where you can totally be like, I really like who I am?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
What's in the gap between pretty much and all in?
I'm not sure there is anything, to be honest. So maybe the answer to that question is that I am there. I do like myself. I have a lot of respect for who I am. I have a lot of respect for what I've tried to do with my life and how I've sort of challenged myself, you know, given certainly the childhood experiences and how much that damaged me. To be at where I'm at now, I feel like I'm absolutely winning. Yeah. That's
awesome. Well, that's really cool to hear. I feel like we just touched the surface today. Like there's so much that we could have talked about, like from your experiences as a youngster to the work that you do with Safeline to your TEDx talk. But I think that was. But thanks so much for coming in. I had a real blast, as you can tell by my big smile.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed it.
Good.
Really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're fantastic to talk with.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you. Cool.
Excellent.
Right, that was really good.